At 6, these are the scenes in Gaza tonight as news breaks that after 15 months of fighting, it looks like a ceasefire deal for Gaza is being agreed. In Israel, families of almost 100 hostages still being held are gathered in Tel Aviv. President-elect Trump says the hostages will be released shortly.
Now, with luck, this is the end of a war that has killed tens of thousands, caused immense physical damage and terrible suffering for the living. It's caused an upheaval in the region, but don't forget, it is a fragile ceasefire. It is not the end of the conflict.
On BBC London, two mothers meet united in grief after losing their sons to knife crime within months of each other in Woolwich.
Good evening. We start with breaking news from the Middle East tonight that an initial ceasefire deal has been agreed for Gaza, according to multiple sources. These are live images from Gaza and from Israel as the news spreads of this deal that's been negotiated for months now. The talks have been taking place in Qatar. There has been no official confirmation from the talks, but a short time ago, President-elect Donald Trump said, "We have a deal for the hostages. They will be released shortly." There's been fighting for 15 months now since Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th. Let's go straight to our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, who is in Jerusalem. And Jeremy, as far as your understanding goes, what is the shape of this deal?
Well, the Israelis have actually said that there are a few things that still need to be ironed out, but it seems clear the direction in which it's going, that they have made that deal. The first phase is critical. There are 3 phases in total. The first phase, 42 days, 6 weeks. In that period, the plan is for gradually 33 Israeli hostages, women, the wounded or sick and older men, to be released in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and detainees, while the Israelis start a gradual withdrawal. The details still to be fully revealed on exactly where they're going and how long that will take. There are concerns that after that 42-day period, the war may resume. I've certainly spoken to senior Western diplomats who are worried about that, but certainly getting to this point is a considerable achievement, and it's long overdue because versions of this deal have been on the table since last May, and both sides, Hamas and Israel, have blamed each other for the delays.
You've already used the word fragile. How much confidence is there that a deal, when we have official confirmation, can hold?
I think it's going to take quite a lot of luck, considerable diplomatic skill, plus a will for it to happen. Because, to start with, there is zero trust on either side. Prime Minister Netanyahu's war aim has always been, he said it many, many times, to completely eliminate Hamas. But Hamas is still in a position where they've been able to kill Israeli soldiers recently and do this deal. So they are not eliminated. They are still a factor. That is going to be a source, a great irritant to Netanyahu and to his government. There are people in his government who are very much against the deal. There are people on the right wing of Israeli politics who I've spoken to who've called it an act of treachery. So it's controversial. Plus, there is so much that can go wrong. There's more than 100 moving parts in this arrangement that they have. But I think that it's the advent of Donald Trump in the White House, the fact he's going to take office for a second time next week, which I think has hurried things up here. He's put a lot of pressure, particularly on the Israeli side. As a matter of fact, there's always been pressure on Hamas, but on the Israeli side to make a deal, he said that deal has to be done by the time that he takes office. But, you know, the thing that to remember about all of this is that this is a very long conflict. Its roots go back more than a century. And while this will be, hopefully, fingers crossed, ending what has been an absolutely terrible war, it does not end the conflict. And in fact, that major conflict, long-term conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is as bitter as it has ever been. And right across the region as well, the consequences of the war in terms of the series of geostrategic earthquakes are still playing out. And the consequences of this war, even if this ceasefire holds, will continue to be felt, I would say, for a generation.
Jeremy Bowen in Jerusalem for now. We will speak to you later on in the programme, but thank you for now. Let's go to Washington. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is there. And Sarah, as Jeremy was just saying, no coincidence, really, that this is happening just days before Donald Trump's inauguration.
No, that's absolutely right. Happening on Joe Biden's watch, which he will be very relieved about. We're expecting to hear him talking to us from the White House, presumably with some more details of this deal as well as his reaction to it very soon. And he has been deeply involved in this. I mean, there's not just been American diplomats taking part in the talks. He himself has been on the phone regularly to leaders in the region trying to get a deal done. And he will doubtless note that it is very similar, in fact, to what the Biden administration was proposing, as Jeremy said, back in May. It's very interesting to note as well that Biden's team in the Middle East have been working closely with Donald Trump's Middle East envoy and his team to make sure that Trump's team have been fully up to date with everything that is happening, to try and ensure there is a seamless transition between the two, to make sure that that change of US president, which is coming on Monday, doesn't upset these negotiations in the Middle East. And Donald Trump has, of course, been claiming credit for this. He, in fact, went on social media to announce this deal was happening before we did any official confirmation. He says it would never have happened if it hadn't been for his election victory. He had said that all hell would break loose if the hostages were not released before he was sworn into office on Monday. And officials close to the talks say that that did put enough pressure on the parties involved that it was a significant factor in getting this deal done now.
Sarah Smith with the latest there from Washington. Thank you. Well, after more than a year of war, what is the current state of Gaza? Our Verify correspondent Nick Eardley is here to tell us.
Thank you, Sophie. Israel launched its offensive in Gaza after the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, where around 1,200 people were killed, 251 others were taken hostage. But the impact of 15 months of war in Gaza has been huge. Whole neighbourhoods have been flattened by Israeli strikes during the conflict. Let's firstly talk about the human cost in Gaza. This is the figure provided by the Hamas-run Health Ministry: 46,707 Gazans killed. Ministry officials also say this is the number of people injured, 110,000. Now, Israel says it's killed 17,000 fighters and that Hamas's figures can't be trusted, but that death toll is very high, and some think that that figure is actually an underestimate. Let me show you a bit more about the amount of damage that's been done in Gaza. This picture is Jabalia in the north of the Strip before the war, and this verified image is of the same scene now. You can see almost the whole area has been destroyed. Next, let me show you a map of an estimate of how much damage in Gaza has progressed over time. There's some really significant damage in the north at the start of the war. It spread south. You can see all these red dots all over the Strip showing buildings that have been damaged or destroyed. The academic experts who put this together based on satellite images think that just under 60% of all buildings in Gaza had been damaged or destroyed to the end of October. The war has also had a considerable impact on the movement of people. The UN estimates that 90% of Gazans have been internally displaced. That's 1.9 million people. And this is a big part of the reason why huge numbers of Gazans have been subject to Israeli evacuation orders over the past 15 months. People have been told often at short notice to leave their homes or sometimes their makeshift homes. There have been strikes, by the way, in some of the areas not covered by these evacuation orders, like the humanitarian zone. The amount of internal displacement in Gaza has been considerable, leading to a huge build-up of internal refugees. Finally, a few figures highlighting the humanitarian challenge that will be faced now that the ceasefire has been agreed. The UN projects this, that 91% of people are facing acute food insecurity. It reckons that almost 1.9 million people are in need of emergency shelter now, and it says that just under 50% of hospitals are still partially functioning. So, Sophie, a huge challenge ahead in Gaza.
Nick Eardley from Verify. Thank you. Well, since the outbreak of the war, BBC News has followed the stories of people in Gaza struggling in a desperate humanitarian crisis, which has seen homes, schools and hospitals reduced to rubble. It's expected a major aid effort will be launched once the ceasefire has been established. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane reports now on Gaza after more than a year of war. You may find some of the images distressing.
They're used to false rumours. Hope has been a lost language in this war. But tonight, perhaps an end. To fear. Exhaustion. Degradation. They have suffered while the talk has gone on and on. Mahmoud al-Dibes and his family have evacuated 9 times. His children scavenge for anything that could be sold to buy food. And they suffer for it. Skin diseases, hepatitis. The smell is suffocating, he says, and the dogs are everywhere. There's nowhere to go to the bathroom. So at night, my family and I went together to relieve ourselves, only to be attacked by dogs that tried to bite us. They lived here before the war. Jabalia. Bombed now into an age of stone. The consequences of the war stretched the length of Gaza and into every life, in one way or another. Hanan Al-Qassas, aged 15, was born with a severe brain disability. But before the war there were working hospitals, and days and nights without terror.
She was the flower of our neighborhood. She used to walk, play, and was just like any other child.
3 months into the war, Hannah became ill with cancer of the eye. Now in constant agony, she can no longer see. With a ceasefire, her mother hopes Israel will allow Hannah's evacuation from Gaza.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. I'm so worried about her, and I feel so bad for her. I want to do whatever I can to help her, and I don't want to be helpless.
As the world waits for details of peace across Gaza, the scale of rebuilding, of a lost world, of broken lives, is immense. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Amman.
As the world waits, says Fergal Keane, and we can take you now to the White House. We are waiting for President Biden, who is expected any time now to come out and speak about this ceasefire deal, which it is understood has been agreed. We have already heard from President-elect Donald Trump, who on social media has said, we have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you. So we will go back to the White House as soon as we get that. The time is almost 6:15, our main story tonight. After 15 months of fighting, celebrations in Gaza after it looks like a ceasefire deal has just been agreed. In Israel, families of almost 100 hostages are awaiting news to find out if and when they will be released.
At 6:30, the East London Hospital urging patients to scan a code to campaign for more cash for its A&E. And celebrating 40 years with a new spectacle at the Royal Albert Hall.
The rest of the news now, and there was a surprise fall in inflation last month, the first drop in 3 months. The figures eased some of the market pressure on the Chancellor as long-term government borrowing rates fell back sharply today. The Office for National Statistics says the rate at which prices were rising was 2.5%, which is down from 2.6% the month before in November. It could make a cut in interest rates next month more likely. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
At Enio's hotel and restaurant on the Southampton quayside, inflation may well have stabilised, but they're still feeling the cost squeeze.
Last year was a good year. It was as expected.
But pressures, including from the budget, loom over this industry.
We need to increase our menu prices, but how far do you increase that? For example, we were talking today about a Valentine's event, and we're looking at the price of a menu for last year and we offering, and we think, well, we can't do that any less than £10 more than we did last year.
Really?
Because that's what we have to do.
£10 per head,
yeah. Because that's the cost.
Yeah. It was falls in hotel prices that actually helped drive down the headline rate of inflation a bit. How employers like Johnny respond to the rise in national insurance, raising prices or limiting wage rises will matter for where inflation goes now. While the main rate of inflation dipped to 2.5%, the actual positive news today came from significant falls in underlying measures of inflation, such as the service sector and core inflation now at a 4-year low. This suggests there's less inflation in the system. This was seen in a sharp fall in the effective borrowing costs for the UK government after the inflation figures here this morning, and then again with better than expected US inflation figures this afternoon.
The fact that we've seen a drop in inflation, particularly in services inflation, will encourage the Bank of England to cut interest rates next month, I think.
Borrowing costs remain elevated, however, and were the centre of exchanges between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition.
His budget means fewer jobs, lower growth and higher borrowing costs.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the global economy is experiencing volatility and higher borrowing costs.
Back at Southampton Port, global and domestic currents are still expected to push up inflation a bit in the coming months. While nobody expects a repeat of the giant inflationary shock we saw a couple of years ago, the Donald Trump impact on the global trading system has clearly unsettled global markets for now, leading to a focus on countries on economies perceived to be vulnerable from slow growth, countries like the United Kingdom. And while we await precisely what Donald Trump is to do with the global trading system, these uncertainties will remain. So some safe harbour for the UK in today's figures, but out on the open seas, conditions remain turbulent. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Southampton.
The COVID inquiry has heard evidence from families whose loved ones were injured by vaccines. The hearing has been told that for the vast majority, vaccines provided significant protection and minimal side effects, but a small number paid a severe price. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Mass COVID vaccination of the UK population saved huge numbers of lives and is widely regarded as one of the successes of the pandemic. But a small minority were damaged by jabs. Jamie Scott was 44, fit and healthy. He suffered blood clots in the brain after receiving the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and is now unable to work.
This was when Jamie, just as he went into his coma for 4 weeks and 5 days.
His wife Kate gave evidence saying, although he'd received a payout for the injuries, they and other vaccine-injured families were now struggling financially.
We suffered devastating consequences. It's a miracle that he's alive. We're the luckiest and lucky couple because he survived what many others didn't. But he's now living with permanent brain damage and a lifelong illness. We shouldn't be at risk of losing our house because we can no longer afford it. People in our group are having to use food banks.
The Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme gives a one-off amount of £120,000 to people who've been harmed by jabs, but only if they are at least 60% disabled. The amount hasn't increased in 18 years. There can be long delays in processing claims. Families harmed by COVID jabs stress they're not anti-vax, but they want adequate financial support for their injuries. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, said recently that officials are looking at options to reform the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, but no timetable has been set. Tomorrow, for the fourth time, the inquiry will hear from the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock and will examine the rise in vaccine hesitancy since the pandemic. The recommendations from this stage won't be published until next year. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
The BBC has confirmed the new presenters for Match of the Day. Kelly Cates, Mark Chapman and Gabby Logan will take over hosting duties from Gary Lineker at the end of the season. He has been presenting the show since 1999. The Irish pop singer Linda Nolan has died at the age of 65. She was first diagnosed with breast cancer in 2005. As a member of the Nolans, she and her sisters rose to fame with hits such as I'm in the Mood for Dancing. Lizo Mazimba looks back at her life.
How many times? One of Linda Nolan's first ever TV appearances, alongside, of course, her sisters. I'm in the mood for chance. 5 years later, the Nolans were a hit in the discos and in the charts with a dance floor classic.
At the time, of course, we were kind of the cheesy Nolans. That was our image, and it was, you know, Irish sisters all singing in nice harmonies and dressed the same, and which was quite a difficult image to have because we were just normal girls.
But there was more to her than just music.
And welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
In more recent years, she was known as a regular guest on ITV's Loose Women, a show which her sister Colleen also sometimes hosted.
Oh God, I'm sorry.
8 years ago, they spoke movingly about the death of their sister Bernie, who also died of cancer.
Some very sad news for you now.
On today's show, presenters Christine Lampard and Nadia Sawalha said their thoughts were with Colleen and paid tribute to Linda.
You're just never prepared. You're never prepared.
Nothing prepares. And they've been through so much as a family, and it just, sending all our love.
She'll be remembered as a presenter, personality and performer who, over the decades, brought joy to so many.
Linda Nolan, who has died at the age of 65. Now let's go back to our breaking news this evening and the news that Israel and Hamas have, it is understood, or are close to agreeing a ceasefire deal. We're waiting for confirmation of that from Qatar, where those negotiations have been taking place. Let's go to our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, who is in Jerusalem. As far as you understand, Jeremy, how far away are we from final confirmation?
Well, it seems to be happening. President-elect Donald Trump has posted on social media that it's happening, and I guess we can assume that he is in the know. There are also sources on all sides who say while the Israelis have said there may be a few details that need to be dealt with, the fact is, it's going to be happening. Then, of course, the big challenges start, making sure the deal sticks, making sure that hostages get released, Palestinian prisoners are released in exchange for that. And as well as that, there are now going to be big questions about what happens to Gaza in the future. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been very reluctant to speak publicly about how the territory would be governed, what would be the shape of governance within it. Is there some kind of political horizon for Palestinians? I would say at the moment there is zero political horizon for them. But of course tonight people will be immensely relieved that there's a chance that the killing will stop. We've been told at the BBC that it will go into effect on Sunday morning, so there are still some days left before the whole thing starts, if that is the case. But I think more details will be emerging in the next few hours.
We're waiting to hear from President Biden. We understand that he is expected to speak shortly. We've heard already from President-elect Donald Trump. One thing he has said, he said the hostages will be released soon. He's also said that he will not let Gaza become a terrorist safe haven. The thoughts now are going to be, once this is agreed, about the future, obviously, of Gaza and how it can be rebuilt.
Yes, which will require an immense investment of money, and most people assume that the bulk of that, if it happens, will be coming from the oil-rich countries of the Gulf, from the Saudis, from the Emiratis, but they have put conditions on all of that. What happens next really is the key question. So let's assume, here's the scenario. the war does end, this episode, terrible episode ends, there is now an immense political challenge about which direction does the conflict go in. Is there going to be some kind of political, diplomatic initiative that would have to be, I think, led by President Trump and his administration to try to reshape the Middle East? And that must be a tempting prospect for those who believe that he can do a deal. Or will they simply just continue in this terrible cycle of killing? Yesterday, the outgoing American Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke about the future of the Middle East, and he said that all sides have to get very real about the sacrifices they will have to make. And for Israel, that, he said, will include a Palestinian state as a bedrock of the building of a better and more peaceful Middle East. And that's something that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government are absolutely adamant that will not happen.
Jeremy, like all other international journalists throughout this conflict, you have not been allowed to go into Gaza to report freely. Do you think that might change?
Well, we have been reliant on absolutely valiant Palestinian freelancers who have fed us material, and we couldn't have done anything without their immense contribution. The Israelis have killed more than 200 Palestinian journalists since all this began inside Gaza. Look, I hope from the bottom of my journalistic heart that we are able to get in there and have a look at what's been happening and to be able to report firsthand, which is, for me, the essence of reporting, the essence of journalism. Will the Israelis let us in? I have absolutely no idea. If the Egyptians regain control of the border crossing between Egypt and Gaza, will they let us through there? I have no idea. I hope that at some point we will get in. As far as I'm concerned, and I think every journalist would echo this, as soon as possible, please.
Jeremy Byrne, our international editor, with the latest there from Jerusalem. Thank you. Let's speak to our North America editor, Sarah Smith. We're expecting to hear from the president very shortly. What are we expecting him to say?
Well, we're hoping that he will give us some more details of what is in this deal. I mean, our understanding from sources is that it is very similar to what had been proposed by the Biden administration before, and it appears it does certainly involve a ceasefire and the release of hostages. But, you know, there's a lot of fine detail that had to be agreed in this deal, and we hope that President Biden will give us some more on that. He also has a big speech scheduled for this evening, in fact, a kind of look back at his 4 years in office and everything his administration has achieved, and presumably he will consider achieving a deal in the Middle East one of the crowning achievements of that. So we might hear more detail then as well. And of course, it's entirely possible that we will hear more from Donald Trump. He's the one who did announce first on his social media post that this had been achieved. And he has some very clear ideas of what he wants to do in the Middle East once he takes over as president. So we may hear more about that very shortly too.
Smith in Washington, thank you. All that will be unfolding in the next few hours. You can keep across all the detail on the BBC News, and also I will be back with all the very latest at 10. Right now, though, it is time for a look at the weather. Louise Lear is here. Hello.
Hi there, Sophie. Well, we've not really had chance to pause and catch breath into the start of the new year. The weather has been pretty chaotic, hasn't it? But this week it's all quiet with high pressure keeping things calm. A beautiful sunset across Cumbria to sit and enjoy. But not for all of us. Some of us kept quite a lot of cloud today and thick enough for a spot or two of drizzle, particularly from Hull down to the Isle of Wight, as you can see in Norfolk a little earlier on. But the high pressure stays with us. The winds stay light. That means there's not going to be that much of a change to the weather story. This week, weather front bringing more cloud and outbreaks of drizzly rain into the far north of Scotland. But where we've had the clear skies through the day, we could see some fog forming overnight tonight. We keep that low cloud drifting back in across East Anglia and South East England, and some patchy fog here as well. Where we've got the cloud, we keep temperatures above freezing. Where we've got the clear skies, it's going to be a chilly start, perhaps down to -2, a little bit of patchy frost and the fog around as well. well. The fog lifts quite quickly as we go through the day. We keep those grey skies across the southeast, unfortunately. Better breaks in the cloud with the sunshine across Wales, northern England and eastern Scotland. A bit more of a breeze breaking up the cloud into the northwest of Northern Ireland and Scotland as well. So where we've got the cloud, we'll keep temperatures around 8 to 10 degrees. The clearer skies, you've got the sunshine, but not quite as warm. Now, towards the end of the week, the high pressure is just going to drift over into the near continent. Subtle differences, but it means that the wind direction changes and it's going to start to come in from the southeast. So a cooler source. So as we move out of Friday into Saturday, there is a potential that it will feel just that little bit colder after this incredibly mild spell of weather. So temperatures on Saturday down to single figures and fog could be an issue once again. Sophie.
Louise, thank you. And that's it from us on the BBC News at 6. Time now for the news where you are. Goodbye.